just going to ask you a couple questions, if that's all right.
Okay.
How would you define violence against women?
Well, I think violence against women is, well, basically like physical violence against women, but I think it has a lot to do with kind of, I think it's more of a mental thing sometimes. The fact that men are biologically, I guess, more powerful than women. So I think violence against women is more of a mental thing, especially like when guys want to control women, they can do it physically. Kind of the way it works in the animal world, I guess. But I would define violence against women as men trying to control women by
So, in your personal definition, you wouldn't include emotional violence?
Yeah.
Yeah?
So what would you define that as?
Like verbal abuse.
Okay.
Yeah, verbal abuse. Especially like, so like, I feel like, and it could be like a socioeconomic thing, but like, let's say men earn more, right? In theory. Even practically. So like, maybe because of that, women seem more vulnerable sometimes in a lot of societies. They're kind of dependent on men. And I think some men know that.
How does that happen though? How do you think, like, what causes that?
To me,
your opinion.
To me, to be honest, I think it just comes right down to physicality, like biology, like evolution. I think it just comes down to like if we were in the animal world or like anarchy or chaos took over, who's gonna survive? The strongest, right? And I think like men, because they're like biologically stronger, they just sort of use that mentality over women.
And how big of a problem do you think violence against women is?
I think violence against women is more of a problem in less educated societies. I think, like, from what I've heard in sub-Saharan Africa and like more rural parts of Asia, it's a big problem. I think it's still a problem in the Western world to some capacity, but I think it comes down to, well, just off the bat, because I'm kind of on the ball here, or not on the ball, on the whatever it is. I think it comes down kind of to two things. One is, I think, what was the question again?
Like, how big, in your opinion, like, how big of a problem do you think it is?
Or is it a problem at all?
Yeah.
What do you
I think it's a problem. I think it's definitely a problem. I think it depends on where you're from to say how big the problem is. I'm from Canada. I'm from Toronto. And I've lived in a couple of like areas. I live in like a couple of socioeconomic, like, I guess, divisions or whatever. And I think for some people, when you're educated and you learn to have like empathy for like all people, it's not as much of a problem. But sometimes when you have other stresses in your life, I think a lot of like lower economic, socioeconomic groups of people tend to use violence as control. And it doesn't have to be against women, it could be against your kids, or it could be against even peers or business associates or whatever, but it happens against women. Another thing is, I think it's how you're raised. I think a lot of problems arise from what you witness as a child. If you witness your father abusing your mom or making sexist remarks. So I think, and the latter part of my life I grew up in an area that has a lot of people who are educated, and I don't think that violence against women is a problem in areas like that in the Western world. But I can say, and I have family in India, and none of my family abuses like their wives or are abused from what I know. But I also know that it has happened as a form of control.
What about emotional abuse? Like you defined emotional abuse as like verbal abuse, right? So what about in Western culture, or you said your family in India? Like, can you say that that's happening right now?
I think that happens. Like I said, I think in India it's not. I think like in less, not necessarily less educated societies, but like I guess in societies where like individual rights. Okay, we're in Korea today. I think here societal rights take precedence over individual rights as opposed to a lot of the Western world. And I think in areas where societal rights count more, violence against women is more of a problem. Physical violence, but I think in places where individual rights count more, verbal abuse is far higher. I think.
So if you could guess at like how likely it is on average for a woman in the world, just out of all women in the world, like how likely it is for them to be abused, what would you guess the statistic is? Like one out of every how many?
And we're talking about physical or verbal?
Yeah.
I would say probably all the women in the world.
Oh wow.
Probably like 8 out of 10.
Have been exposed to something. Can you say that you've witnessed anything? Like in society, like have you seen any?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of physical abuse. I haven't experienced, but I can say like myself, I've thrown on some verbal abuse. And it's just a method of control when you don't want to use physical. When you can't use physical or you don't want to use physical. But I think there's very few guys who've been in a relationship where like where they really cared about someone. And I guess you can say what does care mean, but I think there's very few societies where like very few societies. I think verbal abuse like happens.
And then the last question is, what role do you think, or what actions do you think you could take personally, or men, like as a whole, could take in addressing these issues?
Two things. One, raise your kids right.
What's that? So what's that?
Just have respect for women.
Okay.
I don't think there's a lot of.
But how do you instill that in children? Like
just like I think a lot of children just they react, or their actions are a result of their environment. And if you can provide them with an environment where there's not abuse, I don't even think there has to be necessarily abuse for the children to turn messed up, but just an environment where like you realize that respect is necessary.
Speaking of families,
if you were to have a daughter, what sort of changes would you like to see in attitudes in society and in men in general change by the time that you have a daughter?
Well, I guess ideally it would be nice for men not to think of women as property, not to think of women as sexual beings. But again, like in my heart of hearts, I kind of feel like that's either not going to happen or very, very far away. And I'm not saying it's right. I don't think it's right, but I think it's very far because, and like I said, it derives from like all the socioeconomic stuff. Like when women everywhere in all sectors are making the same amount as men, you know, when women don't need men as much, then we might see something wrong. But like I said earlier, if
what do you mean, sorry, by women needing men? Like what do you mean by that?
Okay.
So seriously, just Frank, your opinion.
Just for example, okay, Cuba, right?
Okay.
And I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think by the age of 30, the average Cuban woman is divorced 3 or 4 times, right? And the reason is, don't quote me on this, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the reason is they live in a society, right? So whether you're a waitress and I'm a doctor, we're both earning the same amount of money. So if I give you shit, you don't take it. You leave. You don't need me for my money. you don't need me for your status, right? So I'm kind of socialist to begin with, but like, but yeah. So a woman, average woman is divorced because when she doesn't take shit, right? But a lot of women in Western society, like if you're a waitress in a Western society and you're married to a doctor and you're used to a certain lifestyle, if he does abuse you or if he does hurt you, are you really going to leave? Like, if you're a waitress in a lot of cities, can you afford your own apartment? A lot of times, can you afford a nice apartment? Even can you go from living in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs to doing that? And I think that's what I think that's what happens a lot. And that's what I mean when I say that women are sometimes without. And I think there needs to be some kind of social change, some kind of social change in the socioeconomic stuff.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks,